Hi and welcome to Aftercare Makes Me Wet. I love that title. Anyway, my name is Dawn, and I'm going to give you a couple of little disclaimers and then a little bit about me, and we will jump right into the class. So first, a couple of disclaimers. I am recording, so please stay on mute until it's time for questions and answers. So anybody that gets this recording later will get the class, but they won't get the questions and answers. And sometimes there's some good information in there. So I always recommend to join live if you can, but if not, that's okay as well. I teach from experience and I'm a storyteller. So I will have stories related to aftercare and my 25 years in the community with aftercare. There will be naughty language. This is an adult class about BDSM scenes and sex. So there will be naughty language. Don't worry about taking notes because you'll get a recording of this, but obviously feel free to. That's how I pay attention, is taking notes and doodling. And then the other thing is that this is going to feel like a fire hose of information because I'm talking at you, which is very different than how we teach in person. In person is very much more interactive. This is kind of just giving you a lot of information. So again, if you have any questions, just write them down, wait till the end, and I will take care of them then, okay? Great. So I'm Dawn. I am half of Dan and Dawn, and Dan and Dawn have been presenting for about 20 some years at this point. We're also authors of about 5 books with the 6th one coming out soon. And we are co-host of the Erotic Awakening Podcast, which has been around for 15 years at this point. We're coming up on 700 shows with that. Okay, yay, I've learned how to make it very short. That covers about that much of what we do. Exactly. All right, so what this class will cover. So I'm going to cover like what is aftercare, what may or may not be needed, some different ideas about it, whose responsibility it is to actually bring up aftercare, how it can be different for different types of scenes and situations, and a little bit about creating your own aftercare bag. Okay, so like I have my own aftercare bag for when I scene with someone. So one of the disclaimers for the actual class is that there is not one true way of aftercare. So I will share with you things that we have tried, things that we've done, things that we've experienced, and then just take the pieces that work for you and leave the rest. It may even be a jumping off board of trying to find some more unique ways of doing aftercare for yourself or what you may request. All right, so just a little bit of terminology of words that I'm going to be using. You guys are probably pretty aware of these. So we have a top and dom. And for this class, top and dom means the person that's doing something. And a bottom sub is the person receiving. In this one, I use top bottom a lot because we're talking about scenes. But you can also have aftercare in a power exchange relationship, in a polyamorous relationship, in a mainstream relationship. So the words could be a little different with that. A scene, I talk about scene 2 different ways, okay? When I mention scene, the first way I mean it mostly is that it is a negotiated length of time of play. Sometimes when I say scene, it means like Dan and I joined the scene as in the community, right? So it's used 2 different ways. Negotiation is talking about limits, no's, and yeses, and this takes place before a scene. Drop, which I'll mention, is that time after a scene where the chemicals leave our body and kind of feeling depressed and unattached. If I say swinging, I mean multiple sex parties. And if I say polyamory, I mean multiple loving relationships. Okay, so those are just some of the words that will show up through this. Sometimes when we teach this class, we're really teaching the 101 beginners. So I try to make sure to go over at least some of what the terminology means. So what is aftercare? I'm going to assume in this day and age, most of you guys at least have an inkling of what aftercare is. For Dan and I, when we started in 99, we did not know what aftercare was. I saw that look on your face. 99. Yes, I am old. So when we started in 99, there was no FetLife. There was no Google. There was no anything like that. The scene in Columbus, Ohio had just imploded. So everybody was underground. I mean, we didn't really have anybody to chat with. We found a few bulletin boards. We had some fantasy books that we wanted to model our life after and try this stuff with, some porn magazines. I mean, that's where we got our ideas from. And this was not a place that aftercare was talked about. It was more about the scene itself and, how to do caning and flogging and things like that. Not necessarily the emotional part of it. We didn't come across that much. And I was finding that, like clockwork, 2 days after a heavy scene or a weekend of doing power exchange or slut play or anything like that, I was crashing and burning. And depression was kicking in, and I would be sitting there going, is this really worth it? This kind of sucks a couple of days after. And Dan wasn't sure how to deal with me. And we kind of, we figured it out over time. We found a local group. We started talking to people, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's sub drop. Here's some things that you can do. You guys are doing aftercare, right? Well, what the hell is aftercare? Well, we learned. And funny enough, or maybe not funny enough, it's actually kind of changed over time. What I needed way back then, I don't need now. So it's kind of shifted. I try to pay attention to what I need as I go to events and play with new people and stuff. And sometimes I will be on one of my calls with friends and I'll be like, you know what, man, I'm just feeling so down and I don't know why. And one of them will speak up and go, didn't you just come back from an event? And I'm like, yes. And after 20 years, I should remember sub drop is a thing. I keep forgetting it for some reason. Anyway, so more to the point of what aftercare is, it's that time, or at least the way most of us think of it, is it's that time that you spend connecting with the person that you just played with. But it's a bit more than that and can be different than that. So it can be time after play where you spend time together and you're either talking or the subs drinking water or chocolate or maybe cuddling or something like that, right? That's how we see it. But it can take on different forms. As in, I'll talk about this a little bit more later. I've got something coming up this weekend. I'm going to be doing it with people, but by myself, and Dan's not going to be there. So aftercare is going to look very, very different for me. I need to think about what it is that I actually think I'm going to need, which I can only guess at because it's a totally different scene that I'll be doing. We'll talk about that. So for the most part, aftercare is seen as that time that you spend with the person that you just played with. Okay, like I said, I will have stories about how that's not always the case. Now, for me, when I do aftercare with someone, what I figured out over time is that it is actually a way for me to ground. I am so floaty, the endorphins are running high, and if they're running really high, I don't know what I'm doing after a scene, right? I could get lost in the hotel. I could get lost out in the woods, ask me how I know. Things like that happen because I haven't taken the time to ground myself. I'm all floaty and things are cool and I forget I need to be stabilized. So for me, that's what aftercare is about, is making that connection with that person that you were just vulnerable with, but also grounding and coming back to earth so that you can function. Okay. Now, I do have a class that I teach called Psychic Hygiene, and I cover a lot of ways in that of how you can ground. Even though they're not kink specific, they can absolutely be used as a form of aftercare, especially if you're at an outdoor event I know a lot of people are going to an outdoor event this weekend. So I've given them tools, and some of them are solo people and know that they won't get the aftercare that they need. So I've taught them how to ground with trees, how to ground on the land, how to bring stones that are grounding to them, how to bring objects that are grounding to them. So it doesn't always have to be cuddles, chocolate, and water. It can be other things. You can be really creative with this. All right. So when Dan and I first started Aftercare, what we figured out was that I had dropped my walls. I had become very vulnerable. I was doing new things and then doubting myself and thinking maybe I was too slutty or whatever. And I really needed cuddle time with Dan, right? This was new for me, and I really needed to know that he was okay with what I just did, needed cuddle time, needed that support. Whereas Dan, holy shit, it energized him. He's like, what do you mean you want to cuddle? I need to go. I need to flirt with people. I need to do this. I need to do that. So we had to come to a compromise. And what he did was he started packing an MP3 player with him. And he picked a song that he really likes, and it's really romantic, and it's like 12 minutes long. And we negotiated this. He's like, I got 12 minutes for you. We will cuddle, we'll have the blanket, I will feed you chocolates when I used to eat sugar. We will do the things, and it'll just me and you, eye contact, we'll do the whole thing. And then when the song winds down, we'll breathe together, we'll start to draw apart, and then I'm going to leave you wrapped in the blanket. But then I need to go flit around, right? So he had to figure out what would take care of him as well as a top, right? Not a lot of people talk about tops and that they also need care, but I'm betting if they pay attention to themselves, they'll see that their energy shifts as well, and they need to become grounded again. So Dan would flit for a little while, and then his introverted self would crash and burn. So he had to learn what he needed as well a certain time after a scene. So it can be, like I said, talking, chocolate, water, hugs, blankets, sitting on the floor and grounding. Sometimes I will sit with my back against the wall, and that's very grounding for me. If I sit with my back against the wall with my hands pressed on the floor, that's real grounding for me. And then I can just breathe and kind of come back to the moment. Okay. I'll breathe with the other person that I'm with. That's very grounding for me as well. Very, very connecting. Now, that's if I do aftercare with the person that I play with. I don't always do aftercare with the person I play with. If I do pickup play, I may ask them to hand me off to Dan after we're done playing. So I did a real fear-based this was a really fear-based scene that I did with someone. And I knew that someone, and I was okay with being vulnerable with that someone, so enough that we could really do a fear-based scene. But for some reason, I didn't particularly want to snuggle with this person afterwards. I mean, the scene was going to be about my fear of falling and really being taken control of and made to feel like I was falling. I didn't want to snuggle with that person later. I wanted to be afraid of him. So that would have broken the scene. I know some people that do like interrogation play or degradation play, they don't want aftercare from the person that they're playing with. It breaks the dynamic of what they're looking for. So if they're degraded by someone and then cuddled later, they lose all that feeling that is their kink, that is their fetish about degradation. So you got to think about that too. Some people will say, oh, you must always have aftercare. No, no, you don't. But pay attention to when you do, right? So in polyamory, our aftercare looks like cuddling when Dan comes home from a date with one of his other partners. We spend time cuddling and then holding hands and watching a movie. And that's what the aftercare looks like. If I've gone out and done some slut play or gone to a swing club or had a one night stand or any of those other really fun things, I like to do something normal with Dan when I come home so that I know everything is okay at home, whether it's grocery shopping or we've even paid the bills before afterwards, just to, just to really get into that. Yep, we're still a couple. So that has that energy. Now, for me, I like to think of aftercare as part of the scene, not an afterthought of the scene. So if aftercare is going to happen, I never assume it's going to happen. Okay. To me, this is something that's negotiated. So during negotiation, I actually will bring it up if the other person hasn't. Okay. So yeah, I just as the implements that we're going to be using or the style of scene that we're going to be using, I feel the aftercare is also part of that. And sometimes the tops are actually relieved if I bring it up because some tops don't like to do aftercare and they have a hard time bringing that up. At least some of them do. Some I play with, they're just like, okay, so, and I don't do aftercare. So if you think you're going to need aftercare, you want to go ahead and get that lined up, right? So it's not, so the bottom isn't caught by surprise. And that's perfectly acceptable. And like I said, as a bottom, sometimes there's people I like to do aftercare with and sometimes not. It depends on the situation. All right. So why do aftercare? And I've already covered a little bit of this, right? But during scenes, we release chemicals most of the time, not all the time. I have a couple of friends that have bottomed for years and have never experienced subdrop, right? They get to a different place. So it's different for different people. Some tops that I know are very much, and this is not derogatory, this is just a way of trying to create a visual. They are very much rack 'em smack 'em, right? So they've got like 20 scenes set up that night. They're like, oh yeah, I'm playing with Susie and we're playing at 8, and then I'm playing with Jill and we're playing at 8:30, and then I'm playing with, right? Because their fetish, what thrills them is to have someone up on the cross and to beat them, and then next person and next person, and that is where they get their joy from. And some of the bottoms that they do that with, they're the same way. They're like, I don't want to be dominated, I want to be spanked. I don't want a 3-hour scene. Get me up there and crash through and make my endorphins, and then I'll go on to the next top. I've got 6 scenes set up tonight too. For me, man, it's all I can do to do 1 scene a night, maybe 2 for an event, because I like the scenes where I am dominated, and sometimes that takes some energy. So you've got different people wanting different things, and therefore sometimes aftercare is wanted and aftercare is not. Personally, I like a scene where I can get trancy. I like to go into trance. I like subspace. I like that floaty feeling. And sometimes I don't want aftercare because I want to keep this floaty feeling. I mean, I talk about it as being a way to ground. Sometimes I want to keep that for a little while. And if I want to keep that for a little while, I've learned over time how to do that. And that means I bring my hooded aftercare blanket. So I bring my own aftercare blanket. I make my own hooded aftercare blankets. And I will find a corner in the dungeon, wrap up in my blanket, flip down my hood, and just kind of snuggle in that and listen to all the screams and the energy and the music and just kind of wrap up in that. And that's my aftercare. And then about 2 o'clock in the morning, I would drag myself to the hotel room and snuggle in next to Dan, and it's all good until 2 days later, and I have subdrop, and then I have to work with that. So, over time you learn what you need, and everybody's going to be different. For Dan, his aftercare is he likes that little bit of snuggle, but then he's got to go and fling some energy around. Man, that's what he's got to do. He's got to fling it off. He's like a spinning top for about an hour. And then a couple of days later, he wants to check in with the person. He has to have that contact to check in the next day or a couple of days later. So that's part of his. One of the other things I like to do that I cover in my energy class, in my psychic hygiene class, is I like to cut cords. So, and what this means, it's not rope, it's energy cords. So what this means is if I play with Dan, I don't cut the cords. That scene is nurturing our relationship. If I have pickup play or just someone I know I'm not going to see in months again or until the event happens again, we've created an energetic connection. So I actually like to visualize those energetic connections as cords, and then I tie off those cords. And that's so that energy doesn't continue to feed back and forth, even though the scene's over. So that's one of those woo things. That's up to you if it's something that works for you or not, just something to think about. Another reason to have aftercare is for some of these scenes, we have put our body through a lot of stress, right? So this helps just calm the body down, calm the emotions down, calm all of that stuff down. All right, hydrating. Everybody's always like, "Oh, what do you want for aftercare?" You probably want a cuddle, chocolate, and water. Well, that's pretty accurate for some. Water, especially, we need to rehydrate after this play. I know for me, the way I breathe, it kind of is like hyperventilating. So it's mouth open and it's dry throat. So absolutely need to replenish with water. And if I've been screaming, absolutely, I need water. And if I've been screaming, everything's great. Okay, so some people need touch, right? Just physical touch when they come down. And then I have found out from some people, when we've done this in class before, I have found out from some people that what they expect and what they want for aftercare is sex. So, knowing that some people do want this, do expect this, do assume this, make sure you're bringing it up during negotiation of what you think aftercare should look like so that you're not getting a surprise later. You should never get a surprise with with what's being offered during aftercare because again, it's part of the scene. So, it's not something outside of the scene. It should be negotiated. So, like I said, I like to negotiate maybe where we're going to do the aftercare at and what it could look like, knowing, and usually anymore, I'm like, oh, except for the scene that I'm going to be doing on Saturday. But usually anymore, I'm like, you know what? I may or may not need aftercare. It depends how far deep I get. Usually my aftercare will max out at about 15, 20 minutes, right? I might need a cuddle if you're up for that. I'm definitely going to need water. I'll bring my own. I don't do chocolate because I don't do sugar. So I will bring a meat stick of some sort, right? So I actually pack my own aftercare bag so that I know I have what I need. And then I'll ask the dominant, so what are you going to need from me? And sometimes that'll take them by surprise. I'm like, no, think, what do you need from me? So they get to think about that too. Cool. All right. For some people, and I already went through a little bit of this too, right, with my stories, but some people do not want aftercare and they really shouldn't be demonized for it. If you're not a person that feels comfortable giving aftercare, just be upfront with it so that the other person can make arrangements. So Dan played with someone, shoot, I can picture the play space. I can't remember where it was. But anyway, this person really wanted to do a deep scene with Dan. She really wanted to be taken deep, but she did not want him to do the aftercare. She didn't know him that well. She had a friend that was going to be there with her, and she wanted her walls broken. She wanted to go deep. She wanted a cathartic scene, and then did not want Dan to provide the aftercare. And as long as you discuss that, I mean, that's great. You know yourself, you know what you need, you've provided your own other person. That's fabulous. So I've got a few people that I play with now that I love to play with them, but I don't really need aftercare. So Saturday, this coming up Saturday, I'm going to be doing a flesh hook ritual. I haven't done one of those in 8 years. I've got 8 years of growing since then, but 4 years of not growing because of COVID. So I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be at the same place where those of you that listen to the podcast have heard me mention Bat before. So Bat used to be one of Dan's collared submissives, and we lost her at the beginning of COVID. And she used to spend a lot of time at the farm, which is where I'm going to be doing this flesh hook ritual. So some of her friends are going to be there, and so I don't know. This could be one of those great woo, I move on to my next whatever sort of events, or it could be me crying for 4 hours because I miss my friend. I don't know. So I don't know what aftercare I'm going to need. I got to figure that out since Dan won't be there, but I do have friends that'll be there. So I will figure that out. Let's see. So one of my first experiences discussing aftercare was probably about 2001, and I was at the Ohio Leather Fest, and there was a presenter there that was like, absolutely, if you do not give aftercare, you're a dick. If you do not offer it, you are a demon. You are like, whatever, whatever. And another presenter was in the class, and she's like, you don't get to speak for me. I like degradation play. I like to be made to feel like I am the worst person in the world. And I don't want aftercare. I want to be kicked into a corner, left like a blubbering fool, and just left alone. And she's like, and this is because I use that time to rebuild myself. I don't want a cuddle. This is personal growth for me. So to tell people that they have to provide it, and or they're the worst human, she's like, you can't do that. And I took that lesson to heart, which is why I try to remember to bring it up during negotiation now, so that everything's covered and I don't have expectations of people. Actually, some of the tops that I've negotiated this with actually assumed they were supposed to provide aftercare. And I'm like, no, you're off the hook. You're off the hook. Don't need it. It's okay. And they're like, oh my God, I'm allowed. This is cool. I'm like, yes, do your thing. All right. So who is talking about negotiation? Who's responsible for bringing it up during negotiation? Everybody should be raising their hand, right? So it is everybody's responsibility. It's each party's responsibility to remember to cover that. Okay. It's not all of us do. There are times that I get so flustered when I'm getting ready to play with someone new that I'm like, ooh, what am I covering? What am I covering? Nudity, sex, toys, and where? And I forget wait, are we kissing? Are we doing this other thing? And aftercare. So I end up writing a little index card with the things to make sure to cover when I do negotiations. So even after all these years, I'll still forget something. So, you should bring it up. And like I said, I have my own aftercare blanket that I've had for years. I've got my hooded aftercare blanket. I make sure I'm able to take care of me instead of expecting other people to have the supplies. So that's one of the things you need to think of for yourself. Do you know what you need? Has it changed over time? Mine definitely has. That 12 minutes that I needed from Dan Now we can, yes, make it much smaller, whatever word that is, abbreviate it. We can abbreviate it now. We've learned skills that work for us now that bring us back to the present. So cool. All right. Like I said, sometimes I need to be handed off to Dan. Okay, now what you don't want to do. Let me tell you the story of what you don't want to do. Okay. Don't you love it when I have these stories? Because that means it happened. So, someone that I had actually known for a while, we had negotiated the scene. And this is like my third time playing with him. And we had done a quickie negotiation because I felt comfortable with this person and I had already had long negotiations with him a couple times before. So we're at an event. We had a quickie. Yep, this is just going to be a spanking. This is going to be on a table because my hip hurts, blah, blah, blah. That sort of quickie thing, just covering some of the basics. We're standing in front of the dungeon door waiting for it to open. And he looks at me and he goes, "So, how would you feel if after the spanking I wanted a blowjob?" And I said, "I would feel if you did not bring that up during negotiation, that you were manipulating my tranciness to get what you wanted." And he's like, "Oh." I'm like, "If you want a blowjob for aftercare, bring it up during negotiation so that we can discuss it like adults. Don't bring it up after we've played and my endorphins are going and I'm in what I've currently learned is called hypnosis hangover. You're in a suggestible state. If you're a bottom and you've been complying through this whole scene for a certain amount of time after the scene, you are still compliant even though the scene is done. So I've learned this recently and I got to figure out how to talk about this more because I have a feeling it's this frame of time after a scene where consent violations are happening. People think that they're asking a question and getting a valid answer when in fact what they're getting is a compliant answer. So I've learned this recently and it's kind of exciting because I want to share this with people and maybe it'll keep consent violations from happening. Anyway, I told this person, if our scene is over and we're doing aftercare and you put something in my face expecting something, we're going to have issues. And I haven't played with him since then because I needed someone that was adult and responsible and could bring it up during a negotiation as a peer, not as someone that was getting ready to bottom for him. So anyway, those are some things that you want to cover. Is there going to be sex involved during the aftercare? Just because there was sex in the scene, even sexual touching, does not mean that that's an automatic sex for aftercare. So make sure you cover that because some people separate sex and BDSM. Some people combine sex and BDSM, but aftercare is more personal. Discuss it, bring it up. Some people are going to be all for a blowjob for aftercare or sex or whatever. Some people are not. Let them decide. Okay. So, like I said, we've covered cuddles and food and all that type of stuff. If your person is diabetic that you're playing with, make sure they know what they need food wise, right? If you're spiking their sugar or dropping their sugar, they need to know what they need. An inhaler. Dan used to play with someone that needed her inhaler after a scene because of the chemicals, dropping and rising. Sometimes a good massage is really nice. I would love for more tops to say, "Hey, would you like a massage as aftercare?" Yes, yes, I would. Maybe I should start bringing that up. But a lot of tops that I play with don't seem like they're the kind that would give a massage. But if they offered, yeah, that would be amazing. And what about kissing? Is kissing on or off the table with aftercare? I've played with a few people that automatically assumed that I was going to be into kissing, and I'm not. Wow, weird. I save kissing for certain people. And I make sure to bring it up during negotiation because there's someone that I seen with intensely. I mean, we've had some major kick-ass scenes. And the first time I negotiated with him, I'm like, so is kissing allowed? And he's like, absolutely not. I'm monogamous with my partner, so kissing is off the table. And I'm like, wow, he's going to beat my ass and staple me and needles and all this other stuff. I'm glad I asked about kissing because I think I would have assumed. So, that's one of those things to talk about. Okay. I have covered this over and over again. What if the top doesn't want to provide aftercare? Just go with the flow. If you still want to play with them, even though they're not going to provide aftercare, just figure out what you need. But it could also be a deal breaker, right? If the top says, I don't provide aftercare, you're going to have to look at yourself and say, but do I need aftercare from them? And need is different than want, right? Need is like non-negotiable. Is it going to crap out that scene and leave you with an icky feeling if you don't get aftercare from that person and they don't want to give aftercare? Then you may have to think again about doing a scene with them. Okay. But if you're the top and you don't do aftercare, then just make sure you're clear with that so that they can make a decision. If the other person is looking for aftercare and they're saying that it's a need, look within yourself and see if there is anything that you can provide. It doesn't have to be what some people think about aftercare. It could be like handing them off to someone, like making sure that they are in a safe space while they come out of the scene, even if you're not able to sit there with them, right? Think of something that you could do if you're wanting to really play with this person that says they need aftercare. Okay, so creating your own aftercare kit, your own aftercare, yeah, kit. Your own aftercare bag. Like I said, I've got blankets, I've got meat sticks, I've got my own water bottle, I've got my own stuffed animal that I like to have with me. I have a first aid kit. Sometimes, most of the time, should be all of the time, dungeons will have a first aid kit, but I like to have my own. It's got my own band-aids in it. It's got my own stuff that I like to use. So if I've been single-tailed or whatever, maybe the top will be into putting the band-aids on me, right? Rubbing in the lotion. That can be really a lot of fun. So if I have a spanking from someone, I do like to ask them, I want a rough spanking. I want a heavy spanking. Would you be okay with lotioning my butt cheeks when we're done? That's kind of hot and sexy, right? So I will ask about that. Okay. So what I usually will talk about at this point as well is sub drop or top drop, but sub drop is usually what we talk about. And aftercare is like one of the ways to try to mitigate sub drop, right? So by grounding and making sure the person feels okay and feels okay about themselves and stuff like that. So with sub drop, I like to recommend a couple of things. Basically, take care of yourself is usually what's recommended. I've got a little trick with that too, though, okay? Because you have to know what taking care of yourself means. So it can mean being wrapped up in a blanket, taking a bubble bath, snuggling with puppies and kittens and candles and incense and all that type of stuff, and just taking a day off and relaxing music and journaling and talking to people and talking to the person that you played with. Sometimes hard candy, a letter from your partner that you keep with you. So all kinds of stuff. Now, what I learned for me and what I need to do after an event is to dive into a new project. If I do the journaling and the book reading and all of that stuff that has me in my brain and in my feelings, I can actually feel a little bit worse. So for me, if I find a new project and jump into it and it keeps the brain busy and it pumps up the endorphins again because I'm excited about something, that kind of keeps the nosedive from happening. It makes things kind of level out a little bit. But that's just the way my head works and the way I work. And I'm actually kind of curious how Saturday is going to work out with the ordeal ritual with the flesh hooks. So, but I'm going to be in a woo space, so it'll work out the way it's supposed to work out. I'll bring my stuff and see what I need. I'll probably overpack and see what I need and what comes up. So, but cool. So that is really the trick of the whole thing with aftercare, right? Do you need it? Do you want it? Don't expect it and negotiate around it. Know that it changes. It can change over time. It can change from person to person that you play with. It can change from scene to scene, depending on the type of scene. All of that stuff comes into play. Keep it in mind and make sure you're paying attention to what works for you and what doesn't.